All right, folks, buckle up because today I am going to tell you the most insane true story in American history. This is the story of how the US government tried to create mind-controlled super soldiers using psychedelic drugs and instead accidentally invented the entire 1960s counterculture movement. This is the story of MK Ultra, a program that was supposed to turn ordinary people into programmable robot soldiers, but instead gave birth to flower power, Woodstock, and your tie-dye obsessed Dan. Yes, this actually happened. Your tax dollars funded the birth of the hippie movement. If you think the government is ridiculous, now wait until you hear this story. You'll realize that government incompetence has a long and storied tradition. Our story begins in the early 1950s. America had just come out of the Korean War, and the Cold War was in full swing. The US government was haunted by one terrifying question: why were some American POWs publicly criticizing America after being captured and even refusing to come home? The CIA's conclusion: the communists must have developed some kind of brainwashing technology. This panic wasn't entirely unfounded. The Soviets were indeed conducting psychological control experiments, and some American POWs in Korea had exhibited unusual behavior. But the American government's response was essentially, if they have brainwashing tech, we need brainwashing tech too, but better. So on the 13th of April, 1953, CIA Director Alan Dulles officially approved MK Ultra. The codename sounds cool, but it is actually short for Mind Control Ultra. Yes. They used the German spelling because this program was partly inspired by Nazi human experiments. That should have been red flag number one, but apparently nobody cared. The program's goals sounded like science fiction: develop drugs and techniques that could control human behavior, create perfect spies and soldiers, and make enemies spill all their secrets during interrogation. The budget virtually unlimited oversight. Basically none. Ethical constraints. What are those? This was the US government essentially saying, let's see how badly we can mess with human consciousness. What could possibly go wrong? The actual head of MK Ultra was Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a mild-mannered chemist who looked like your neighbor's accountant. This guy had a stutter, walked with a limp, and seemed completely harmless. In reality, he was probably one of the most dangerous scientists in American history. Gottlieb had a simple philosophy. Any experiment was justified in the name of national security. He believed that science could solve any problem, including how to control the human mind. His team included researchers from Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, and other top universities. These weren't fringe mad scientists. These were respected academics who believed they were serving their country. Gottlieb gave them a simple mission: find ways to control human consciousness. No limits on methods, no limits on budget, no limits on moral boundaries. They tried everything: electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, hypnosis, various drug combinations. But soon they discovered one particularly interesting chemical compound: lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. This little molecule was about to change everything, just not in the way they expected. LSD was actually discovered by accident in 1938 by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann. In 1943, Hofmann accidentally absorbed some LSD in his lab and experienced humanity's first recorded LSD trip. He later wrote about seeing kaleidoscopic colors and constantly changing shapes. This sounded beautiful to Hofmann, but to the CIA, it meant a potentially powerful tool for altering human consciousness. By 1951, the CIA began secretly purchasing almost the entire world's supply of LSD. They contracted with Sandoz Pharmaceutical Company in Switzerland, basically monopolizing the drug. The early experiments were conducted within the CIA itself. Scientists would dose each other with LSD and observe the effects. This sounds like a college fraternity prank, but these people were conducting scientific research with taxpayer money. The results quickly became clear. LSD could indeed dramatically alter consciousness, but controlling that alteration was nearly impossible. Some people became extremely fearful, others became euphoric, and still others completely lost touch with reality. But Gottlieb and his team believed that if they could just understand the drug's mechanisms, they could control its effects. They were wrong, but they were about to spend millions of dollars and ruin thousands of lives finding that out. Soon, experimenting on themselves wasn't enough. Gottlieb needed more data, more test subjects. The problem was, how do you get enough experimental subjects without exposing the program? The answer was deception. The CIA began looking for suitable test subjects across the country. Their targets were people who were unlikely to be noticed and who wouldn't cause too much trouble if something went wrong. Mental hospital patients were perfect candidates. These people were already marginalized by society, and their abnormal behavior could easily be attributed to their mental illness. Prison inmates were also ideal test subjects. The CIA partnered with the federal prison system to administer various drugs to prisoners without their knowledge. Most shocking of all, they even experimented on ordinary citizens. CIA agents would slip drugs to unsuspecting people in bars, restaurants, and even government offices. Imagine this, you are enjoying your Friday night cocktail, and suddenly the walls start breathing and colors become impossibly vivid. You think you are going insane, but actually you've just become an unwitting victim of a government experiment. This wasn't some rogue operation. This was official US policy, approved at the highest levels. With a budget larger than most small countries' entire military spending, in November 1953, something happened that should have changed everything. Frank Olson, a 42-year-old CIA biological weapons expert, attended the annual work retreat at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. On the second night of the retreat, Gottlieb secretly spiked the drinks of Olson and several colleagues with LSD. This was an experiment to see how LSD affected unwitting subjects. Olson's reaction was severe. He became extremely anxious and paranoid, began questioning his work and the CIA's morality. He told his wife he wanted to quit the project. 9 days later, Olson plunged to his death from a 10th floor hotel window in New York City. The official story was suicide. Olson's family was told he had suffered a mental breakdown due to work stress. They weren't even told he had been given LSD. This secret was kept for 22 years, until the Rockefeller Commission investigation in 1975 finally revealed the truth. Olson's family finally learned the real cause of his death. Olson's death should have been a wake-up call, but instead of stopping, the MK Ultra program actually expanded. The CIA's attitude was essentially, oops, we accidentally killed someone with our mind-control drugs. Let's try harder next time. If you thought the story was already crazy enough, you haven't heard the most outrageous part yet. In 1955, the CIA established a series of safe houses in San Francisco and New York that looked like ordinary apartments, but were actually government-operated brothels. These brothels were equipped with one-way mirrors, recording equipment, and cameras. The prostitutes were actually CIA operatives whose job was to lure clients and then slip LSD into their drinks. Clients thought they were just enjoying a normal business transaction. In reality, they had become unwitting subjects in a government-monitored drug experiment. CIA scientists sat in the next room, observing and recording these people's behavior under the influence of LSD through one-way mirrors. They wanted to understand how the drug affected judgment, inhibition, and memory. This project was called Operation Midnight Climax. Yes, that was the actual code name. The project was run by George White, a Federal Bureau of Narcotics agent, who was later recruited by the CIA. White was a rough character who enjoyed this kind of power, enjoyed being able to manipulate people without being detected. These safe houses operated for nearly a decade, affecting hundreds of innocent people. Many victims never knew what had happened to them. They just thought they'd had a particularly weird night. Picture this. The US government was literally running LSD brothels as scientific experiments. They had government employees whose job description was basically professional drug dealer who gives drugs to unsuspecting citizens. It is like if the FBI opened a chain of Starbucks but secretly added experimental chemicals to every latte while filming customers' reactions. Meanwhile, the CIA was also funding LSD research at universities across America. They provided funding through various front organizations, including innocuous-sounding institutions like the Society for Human Ecology and the Society for the Investigation of Human Relations. Harvard University was one of the most important research centers. In 1960, the psychology department hired a young lecturer named Timothy Leary. Leary was initially interested in LSD research because he believed the drug might have therapeutic value. Leary began the Harvard Psilocybin Project, ostensibly to study LSD's effects on creativity and problem-solving abilities. In reality, this project was secretly funded by the CIA. But then something happened that the CIA hadn't anticipated. Leary tried LSD himself. In the summer of 1961, Leary took psilocybin, a natural psychedelic, while vacationing in Mexico. This experience completely changed his worldview. He later described it as the most important experience of his life, opening his eyes to the vast potential of consciousness. When Leary returned to Harvard, he began to see psychedelic drugs in a completely different way. He no longer viewed them as tools of control, but as tools of liberation. The CIA had accidentally created their own worst enemy. Leary's transformation was a disaster for the CIA. They had been counting on him to help develop control technologies, but instead he began preaching the liberating potential of psychedelic drugs. In 1962, Leary began speaking publicly about LSD's positive effects. He claimed the drug could expand consciousness, help people break free from social conditioning, and achieve true self-knowledge. His slogan, "Turn on, tune in, drop out," became the battle cry of the counterculture movement. Harvard University became increasingly uncomfortable with Leary's activities. In 1963, they fired him for failing to follow proper research protocols. But the damage was already done. After leaving Harvard, Leary became the spiritual leader of the psychedelic drug movement. He gave lectures across the country, wrote books, and spread the gospel of LSD. The CIA realized they had made a huge mistake. The researcher they had funded was now their biggest enemy. It is like if McDonald's hired someone to improve their burgers, but instead that person started a movement convincing everyone that fast food was poison and they should grow their own vegetables. Meanwhile, at Stanford University, another CIA-funded experiment was producing unexpected consequences. Ken Kesey was a creative writing student at Stanford who volunteered for CIA-funded LSD experiments. These experiments were conducted at the Menlo Park Veterans Hospital, ostensibly to study psychedelic drugs' therapeutic effects on mental illness. Kesey would go to the hospital weekly, take various doses of LSD, and then undergo psychological testing. Researchers wanted to understand how the drug affected cognitive function. But what Kesey got from these experiments wasn't scientific data, it was artistic inspiration. The LSD experiences inspired him to write "One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest," which became a classic of anti-authoritarian literature. More importantly, Kesey began to believe that LSD should be used more widely. In 1964, he used the royalties from "One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest" to buy a school bus, painted it in psychedelic colors, and formed the Merry Pranksters. The Merry Pranksters traveled across the country in this bus, called further hosting acid tests, essentially large-scale LSD parties. They distributed LSD for free, played experimental music, and created psychedelic experiences. These events attracted thousands of young people, many of whom were experiencing LSD for the first time. Kesey and his crew had inadvertently become major promoters of psychedelic drug use. The CIA had funded the research that created one of the most influential counterculture figures of the 1960s. They were literally paying for their own opposition movement. The Merry Pranksters' acid tests attracted many musicians, including a band called the Warlocks, later renamed the Grateful Dead. The members of the Grateful Dead, particularly Jerry Garcia, were profoundly influenced by LSD experiences. The drug changed their understanding of music, inspiring them to create an entirely new sound. Psychedelic rock, the band's sound engineer, Owsley Bear Stanley III, was not only responsible for their audio equipment, but also became one of the most important LSD manufacturers on the West Coast. Stanley's LSD was considered extremely high quality, known for its purity, by 1965. San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district had become the center of psychedelic culture. Thousands of young people flocked to the area seeking spiritual enlightenment through LSD. These young people weren't looking to escape reality. They were looking for a deeper understanding of reality. They believed LSD could help them see through society's hypocrisy and find life's true meaning. The CIA's mind control drug had become the foundation of a movement dedicated to expanding consciousness and questioning authority. By 1966, LSD had completely escaped from government laboratories and become a core element of the counterculture movement. The Summer of Love peaked in 1967, with hundreds of thousands of young people gathering in San Francisco to participate in an unprecedented cultural experiment. These young people, later called hippies, embraced peace, love, music, and psychedelic drugs. They rejected traditional values, opposed the Vietnam War, and questioned all forms of authority. LSD served as a catalyst in this movement. The drug allowed people to experience the plasticity of consciousness, to realize that reality might not be what they had been taught to believe. Music underwent a revolutionary change. The Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Pink Floyd's early work, Jefferson Airplane's Surrealistic Pillow, all were deeply influenced by LSD experiences. Art, literature, and philosophy were all impacted. An entire culture began questioning established norms and assumptions. The government's attempt to create controllable soldiers had instead created the most anti-authoritarian generation in American history. By 1967, the US government realized they faced a massive problem. The control tool they had tried to create was now being used against them. LSD hadn't created compliant soldiers. It had created a generation of anti-war protesters. These young people not only refused to serve in the military, but actively opposed government policies. In October 1967, tens of thousands of anti-war protesters surrounded the Pentagon. Many protesters had used LSD, believing the drug gave them the ability to see through the war machine's hypocrisy. The government's response was swift and harsh. In 1968, LSD was classified as a federal controlled substance. Possession, sale, or manufacture of LSD was now a felony. The same government that had once purchased and distributed LSD in massive quantities was now arresting people for using it. Timothy Leary became the government's public enemy number one. In 1970, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for marijuana-related charges. President Richard Nixon called him the most dangerous man in America. The irony was perfect. The government's own research subject had become their greatest threat. Facing growing public pressure and the threat of congressional investigation, the CIA decided to terminate the MK-Ultra program. In 1973, outgoing CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MK-Ultra files, thousands of pages of research records. Experimental reports and financial documents were shredded or burned. This destruction was designed to cover up evidence and prevent the public from learning what the government had been doing for the past 20 years. But some documents survived, mainly because they had been misfiled in financial records. In 1975, these documents were discovered by the Rockefeller Commission, and MK-Ultra's existence was finally made public. The government had tried to erase the evidence, but you can't erase the cultural revolution you accidentally created. In 1975, the Rockefeller Commission began investigating the CIA's domestic activities. They discovered the existence of the MK-Ultra program and the fact that the government had conducted drug experiments on citizens without consent. In 1976, the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Church Committee, conducted a more thorough investigation. Their report revealed the full scope of MK-Ultra, over 150 research subprojects involving more than 80 institutions, including universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies, affecting thousands of unwitting subjects, causing at least one death. Frank Olson. The public reaction was shock and outrage. People couldn't believe their own government would conduct such unethical experiments. The CIA's response was essentially, "Oops, our bad. We were just trying to protect America by secretly drugging Americans. How were we supposed to know that would backfire?" As the truth emerged, MK-Ultra victims began coming forward to tell their stories. Some former mental hospital patients described how they had been given massive doses of LSD without their knowledge, then forced to undergo various treatments. Prison inmates told of being told they were participating in medical research, only to discover they had become subjects in drug experiments. Some ordinary citizens shared their experiences of being drugged in bars or restaurants, and the psychological trauma that followed for years. These testimonies revealed the true cost of the MK-Ultra program, not just money, but human dignity and trust. Many victims suffered long-term psychological damage. Some never fully recovered from their unwitting psychedelic experiences. Families were destroyed, lives were ruined, all in the name of national security. The impact of the MK-Ultra program extended far beyond its original goals. While it didn't create the brainwashed soldiers the government wanted, it did fundamentally change American culture. Psychedelic experiences influenced an entire generation of artists, musicians, writers, and thinkers, from the Beatles to Pink Floyd. From Ken Kesey to Tom Wolfe, countless creators bore the mark of LSD experiences. More importantly, the psychedelic movement promoted scientific research into the nature of consciousness. While this research stagnated in the 1970s for political reasons, it has resurged in the 21st century today. Researchers are exploring the potential of LSD and other psychedelics in treating depression, PTSD, and other mental health conditions. Ironically, the drugs the government tried to weaponize may now become powerful tools for healing psychological trauma. MK Ultra may be the most spectacularly backfired government program in American history. The government spent millions of dollars, conducted thousands of experiments, and affected countless innocent lives, all with the goal of creating technology to control human minds. The result, they created the most anti-authoritarian cultural movement in American history. They wanted to make brainwashed soldiers. They made hippies instead. They wanted to promote conformity. They promoted rebellion instead. They wanted to control minds. They expanded minds instead. They wanted to win the Cold War. They created a movement that opposed war itself. Maybe that is the power of human consciousness. Even when faced with the most powerful attempts at control, free will always finds a way to express itself. Remember to subscribe to Wacky History.